Well, concrete's like timber, it's hygroscopic. So it absorbs moisture and it releases moisture. And it's like a sponge. So yeah, it's very much like timber in that regard.
Hello and welcome to the Building Slayology Potty, where we talk about better buildings to live and breathe in. Today, we're diving into flooring and concrete. Today's guest has been associated with the floor covering industry for 40 years. He's considered to be one of the industry's most respected and unbiased analysts. His services are rendered to determine in an honest and impartial manner if and what problems exist, who or what is at fault, and to assist in determining resolutions. Today's guest is Don Considine. I first encountered Don during my advanced mould testing subject that I have been taking in recent months with the Australian College of Environmental Studies as part of my diploma in building biology. During Don's lectures, he took us through moisture testing of concrete in depth, and I thought this was something that we needed to talk about on the podcast. So welcome, Don.
Thank you. Thanks, Jess. So glad to be here.
Excellent. So what does a standard day in the office involve for you? Somebody in the flooring, I don't come across people such as yourself in my day-to-day work. So what does your day involve?
Look, my day varies. I've got two grown sons who, although they live at home, they look after themselves. So I get into the office anywhere between 6 and 7. And my day, my day varies very much. So I could be writing reports, I could be going onto site, I could be doing moisture testing, I could be going interstate. I also do work overseas, so it just varies. But predominantly, the majority of my work is writing reports after I've done an inspection.
Mm-hmm.
But it varies from job to job.
So tell us about these inspections. What exactly are you inspecting?
So I inspect floor failures, or I also get involved before a flooring fails. So some of the bigger builders use me to make sure that the project's going to run smoothly. So they'll engage me before the floor coverings are even installed. So I might go to site, make sure the slab's okay, make sure the moisture testing's been done correctly. But the majority of my time is spent on defective installations of vinyl, carpet tiles, timber, epoxy coatings, just flooring in general, preparation in general. So it completely varies. But the majority of my job is going out after something's failed and then doing an inspection, lifting up the floor, maybe doing moisture testing and working out why the product's failed. Unfortunately, the majority of my complaints do revolve around installation failure, which is unfortunate, but there is a lot of money spent on remediation of flooring in Australia.
And so when you say failure, you obviously mean, lifting, bubbling, mould, those sorts of things.
Well, yeah, look, I'm doing one at the moment where mould was found. The slab's actually sitting below the car park, so the water from the car park appears to be coming into the slab because it's below it and there's some cracks in it. I look at flooring that's lifting. Moisture can also cause planks to shrink, so we get shrinkage, the wrong glue being used, so it's not sticking the products down properly. But look, the majority of my work is moisture-related flooring failures. That's what I specialise in, but unfortunately it's also where the biggest area of complaints are, because unfortunately the majority of contractors out there don't moisture test before they do a job. A lot of it's lack of knowledge, lack of training. Some of it, they just take a gamble and think, it hasn't happened to them, so they'll take a chance.
So I might digress to some questions that pop into my head here, Don. Hope that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
From my list.
Yep.
In terms of training, is there anything inside like a concreting apprenticeship or a carpentry apprenticeship or anything that talks about moisture testing?
So there's a floor laying apprenticeship, and my younger son just finished his at the start of this year. So that does go into moisture testing. What you've got to remember is with an installer, he's going out to lay the job. He's not quoting the job generally. So he goes out to a job and he expects that it's going to be okay. Moisture testing needs to be done before he or she gets to site. So the flooring contractor or retailer should really be doing a moisture test a day or a week before they go to site and saying, yes, the slab is okay, or no, it's not, it needs a moisture barrier. But unfortunately, most layers go to site, they lay it. Some of them don't even understand that moisture testing is required. Domestically, it's also very hard. I mean, it's not extremely expensive, but with a residential job that might only be a couple of $1,000s, it does add to the cost. So people will take a chance and just go, oh, look, it's only a couple of $1,000s, but the remediation costs are normally triple what the original cost was.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned, the moisture testing should be done a couple of weeks before the floors go down. Is that that across the board, like commercial, residential projects, that doesn't vary?
Look, it varies all the time, to be honest. I mean, we do the large supermarkets and they normally get us in like a month or so beforehand because they're doing a refurb. So they'll get us in so that they can prepare that if it needs a moisture barrier, they can prepare for that. So that obviously they don't shut the whole supermarket when they do it in sections. So they'll know that, okay, we need a moisture barrier for this job. So they prepare. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the layer will go out expecting that the slab's ready. He'll just go and lay over it. Some people engage us because the contractors told them that they need a moisture barrier, but, it might cost a lot more money. And they go, oh, we just want to make sure that the contractor's not trying to take advantage of them. So they get us in there to do secondary testing. But it should be done beforehand, but there are times where we do it after the fact, after it's failed. But the standard does say, the two standards, AS 1884 and 2455, both say that testing should be done before the flooring's laid. Now, it can be done the day before, but a moisture barrier can take a couple of days to put down. So if you only do it a day before, then you may not have the time to do that and for it to cure.
Yeah, and sometimes if you're doing core drill testing, they take 24 to 48 hours to get results from, right?
Yeah, the in-situ probe test that we do, which is ASTM 2170, you drill into the slab with a 19mm drill bit. In our case, you drill to a depth of either 40% or 20%, depending on the slab is suspended or on ground or metal decking. You leave a sensor in. The equipment we use has got a sensor built in. You put it in the slab, you come back 24 hours later and you take a result. There are other test methods which we also use. There's the calcium chloride test method, which is a surface test. Now, that's used when you can't drill into the slab. So there could be in-floor heating, there could be electrical wiring, there could be some reason you can't drill into the slab. There could be penetrative moisture barriers, which you can't do the in-situ probe test. So you do the calcium chloride test, which measures the moisture vapor emission rate out of the slab. There's also a surface test meter. Now, the surface test meter is probably the most widely used because it's cheap and quick. The problem is that it's based around an ASTM 2659 standard guide, and that actually says in it that it's not a go, no-go test method. People use it because, as I said, it's quick and easy. The other problem with it is that there are hundreds of these surface meters out there. The surface meter we use, which is a Tramex meter, has a maximum ceiling of 6.9%. Other meters have a maximum of 10, 11, 100, 1,000, 300. So you can't compare those meters against each other. Remediators use the surface meter as well. And I was on the Australian standards for mould and water restoration, and they have a different requirement of what they consider dry to what they work off an IRCRC standard, which doesn't really take into account floor coverings. Whereas obviously when you're laying a floor covering, you've got a completely different standard and a completely different requirement. So you've got to be careful. Builders need to be careful that when they're doing a remediation and the remediator hands it back and says it's dry, they don't necessarily mean it's dry enough for floor coverings to be installed. It's just dry enough to meet the IRCRC standard.
Interesting. So could you explain what the IICRC is, please?
Well, it's look, I'm not an expert on this. I was on there for the floor covering side of it, but it's a mould and restoration standard. So it talks about drying the building envelope, how to do that, and goes into a lot of technical stuff that I don't get involved in. But that requirement is, again, they have to get it to a certain, plaster and the floor and all that have to be a certain standard, and most of that is done with surface meter testing when it comes to the floor. And obviously when it comes to floor coverings, it's the in-situ probe test is the main test that's mainly used in Australia now. So we are comparing. We did try to get more involved with, get floor coverings more involved in the IRCRC standard, but because it's actually controlled overseas, we couldn't do that. So we are looking, at the moment, I'm on the Australian Standards Committee we're coming up with a moisture testing handbook. We did look at a standard, but the trouble with a standard was that the equipment's not made in Australia. So to come up with a standard that overseas are going to recognise would have been very difficult. So what we've done is we're putting a handbook together now, which we hope will be finished by the end of the year, early next year, which will go through all the different test methods, how to do them, what they give you. We won't tell you which one to use because manufacturers can vary, so you have to rely on that. But hopefully it'll give you all the information of where to put them, how often to do them, and all the information you'll need so that someone can go out and do it themselves, and builders can check to make sure that it is being done correctly, because a lot of time some of the equipment doesn't meet the requirements, or people don't test for long enough. Our testing's done over 24 hours. Some people might do it for an hour and say, some equipment says it's within 5% within an hour, but we still wait the 24. So it's a training. It's also going to be a training document for apprentices and things like that. So we're quite excited when it's going to be finished.
Oh, you'd have to send me a link or a copy or something when it comes out, and I can
Definitely
send it out. Add it as show
Sure.
notes, even if it's if this episode hasn't yet been released.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, that'll be great. The testing, so there's two types of testing that you took us through in the mold course, the advanced mold testing.
Yeah.
One was the core drilling and one was the surface meter. So
Yeah.
we use surface meters as part of our studies. You just put the meter on a surface and it tells you wet or dry, basically,
Yeah.
or it can give you, depending on the settings, it can give you a reading.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is the core drilling to a certain depth. Can builders themselves or trades themselves buy these kits online and do the testing themselves, or do they have to engage a contractor, a specialist, to come out and do that testing for them?
Look, they can certainly buy the equipment. The equipment I buy it's out of the States, but I buy it from a company called Kevmore in WA, and they get me the equipment when I need it overnight. So it can certainly be done by the builder. The issue for the builder is when they're trying to get a variation from their end client that, on a commercial job, it could be $50, $100, $200,000. The end client's reticent to accept the builder's test results because it's in their interest to get that variation. So a lot of time they'll get me in just to secondary test to make sure that they're not being ripped off. But, the standard says that the testing must be done by a competent person. Now, competent is, really difficult. But to be honest, if I'm a builder and I've been in the industry for a long time, I can drill a hole in the floor and I can follow it.
Exactly.
There's videos online. And look, we're always happy I've done training for flooring contractors and even presentations for builders to help them through that, because, we can't test every slab out there. We do a lot of testing. It keeps us very busy. So, but yeah, we're there as the backup, or when you needed someone certified to do it.
Yeah, I guess getting someone independent is always better if you need, proof of something. But when you were taking us through the testing and you had the kit and all the bits and pieces and you just drilled, I thought to myself, it looks pretty straightforward to do. And although, the destructive testing is always not really desirable, the process itself doesn't look too tricky. It just takes time.
Don't give away our secrets. It isn't difficult, and it's like anything. Once you've done it, like I've done thousands and thousands of tests, so it's second nature. But we train people here to do it because, I'm not as young as I used to be, so we do have others here, and they go out and they can learn very quickly. It's all about, when you're drilling into a slab, we have a scanner here, so you can hit Rio. So we scan the floor beforehand to make sure we don't hit steel reinforcement or any power. There shouldn't be much power in a concrete slab, but just in case. So we do that. If we're doing a large supermarket, they actually get the floor scanned for services for us. But it's not a difficult test if you've got the right equipment. And we use the Wagner equipment for moisture testing. It's got a built-in sensor. You drill the hole, you put it in, you come back the next day, you can take an instant read. Some of the other equipment don't have the built-in sensor. You've got to come back the next day and then wait for it to equilibrate within the slab, the sensor, and that can take up to a couple of hours. But that equipment is also cheaper because they're reusable, whereas the equipment we use isn't reusable. But we use it for a couple of reasons. One, it's very quick the next day, but also it's calibrated when we put it in the hole. We don't have to go back every 3 months or 6 months or worry about calibration period. And look, I've been using that equipment for 10, 15 years and it's very reliable. They're based in the States. They always come back to me with information. The equipment's easy to get from Perth. Tramax also makes some good equipment, and I use one of their meters for the surface testing. And then there's calcium chloride testing, which those kits we also get from the same place in Perth. We get it from Kevmore in Perth.
Is that the one where you weigh the beads?
Yes, that's right. The calcium chloride pellets. So they absorb moisture out of the slab, and then they obviously increase the weight. So you weigh them beforehand and then after 60 to 72 hours. We are doing more and more of that. We used to do hardly any, but because of the moisture suppressants that are being used on concrete slabs, we are just starting to do more of those now. And if moisture suppressant, do you want me to go through what a moisture suppressant is?
Yeah, a couple of questions popped into my head then, but that was one of them. So yes, please.
Sorry. So Look, there's products out there that you spray them on and they get absorbed into the slab and they turn into like a gel, and they're supposed to hold the moisture in the slab so that it comes out much more slowly. And in that case, you can't use the in situ probe test because in theory that it's trapping the moisture in the slab, and if we drilled in and used a sensor, it would be high. The calcium chloride, you prepare the floor, you put these down for 60 to 72 hours, and then it actually withdraws the moisture out of the slab, the moisture vapor out of the slab, and gives you a result. It's a test that's been around, I think, in the US since the 1950s. A lot of people don't like it, but when it comes to a surface test, we find that it's quite good. And I've been using that for over 10 years as well.
Very easy to stuff up if you spill your beads.
Look, and I have learned my lesson there, because it does form like a vacuum. And there was one time when I tried to pull the kit up and I took it off and the vacuum the beads went everywhere. So what we do now is we cut the top of the kit, the plastic dome, and that releases the air pressure and then it comes out that way. But, if you're clumsy and you do drop it, well, then that kit, you can't use that. Even if you drop a couple of pellets out it, it's void the test. So it's not a difficult test, but you have to go to site 3 times. So it's a 5-day test. You prepare the floor the first day, you put the kit down on the second day, and then you go back 60 to 72 hours later. So it has to be done on a Monday or a Thursday to fit in with that time frame. It's an easy test and it's there for a reason.
But if you stuff it up, you lose 5 days.
That's right.
Or more.
And look, even with the in situ probe test, you could drill too far into the slab or you could drill it too shallow. We photograph everything we do. So when we drill a hole with that, we measure it. We take a photo of the measurement to show we've drilled to the right depth. We take photos of the holes. We do all that. And look, everyone should do the same thing, because if something happens in 6 months and you're saying, oh yeah, I tested it and it was 70, well, what's your proof? We have thousands of photos here for that reason. So we can say, well, on this day we tested it and it was this.
So what is the acceptable moisture level in a concrete slab for laying floors?
Okay, so the standard has default settings. So all through both standards, it says manufacturer's instructions. So adhesives are becoming more moisture tolerant, leveling compounds as well. So the standard says manufacturer's instructions all through it. And obviously, if you've got, say, a vinyl floor that can go up to 80%, you've got a leveling compound that go up to 85%, you've got an adhesive that can go up to 90%, you go with the lowest. So the vinyl can only take 80%, so you go with the 80%. Sometimes the adhesive manufacturer and the vinyl manufacturer will get together and go, well, okay, we'll allow for 85% because the glue can withstand that. So that does vary, but the standard for resilient flooring is 80% is the default. So if the manufacturer doesn't give you a figure, you go with 80%. With the carpet standard, it's 75% with the in situ probe test, or it's 80% with the hood test. Actually, there might be 70 and 75 now. I forgot what we've done. I think it's 75 and 80. But the hood test nobody uses it anymore. Has been around for decades. So they were reticent to take it out of the standard, but it's hardly used anymore. It's a bit more difficult to do. The equipment's not readily available in Australia anymore, but a couple of people still do use it. There's not many manufacturers that have that measurement in there, but the standard calls for 3 pounds per 1,000 square feet per 24 hours. But that can go up to 5, and some products go up to more than that. That's moisture vapor emission rate. With the surface meter, because I mentioned before, because every meter, or a lot of meters have different ceilings, the Tramax meter that I use, for instance, ceiling is 6.9, they say above 3.5 to 4 is considered wet. But other meters, it all varies, where you've got meters that go up to 1,000. So obviously that varies. It's what it's measuring. Some of them measure different. Some are capacitance, some are electrical resistance. So it's really up to the manufacturer of that equipment to tell you what's considered wet and dry. But the trouble with the surface meter test is you won't find any resilient or carpet carpet manufacturers that quote that standard. So if you're using that test meter and something happens, well, then you're going to be in trouble because they won't accept that as a test method.
Yep. So moisture testing, the surface testing, is only really a qualitative measure. Like it's like an indicator, and the
indicative, yeah.
And
in saying that, the Australasian Timber Flooring Association, ATFA, still do recognise surface metre testing for timber floors. Now, there is one of the people on the ATFA committee is on the moisture testing handbook with us, and I think from that they are maybe looking at changing that, but I can't speak on their behalf. Currently, they do allow surface metre testing as well as in situ probe testing.
Okay. And how deep the surface meters measure from the surface?
Well, it depends who you talk to, but between 10, 15, 20 mil. So the other problem with that is that the driest part of a concrete slab is the surface. So you're measuring the driest part of the slab. What the in situ probe test is doing, it's actually a predictive test. So it's predicting what's going to happen with the moisture in the slab when you put a floor covering in it. So for me, it's a very good test. People all around the world that love and hate different test methods, and they've all got reasons for that. But what I can say is I've never tested a floor with in situ probe test and said it's dry and had a failure. But, the surface meter test, we have had testing done with surface meters, and then we test it with the in situ probe test, and there's in situ probe test will say it's wet and the surface meter will say it's dry. So we go with the in situ probe test. The surface meter can also, because it does penetrate into the concrete, can also be affected by aggregate and steel reinforcement. Now, steel reinforcement shouldn't be that close to the surface, but there are times when it is. And obviously it works, it's conductive, so the more moisture in a slab, the higher the reading. So it's a test, good test for a quick result. We use it when we're doing in situ probe test to go around and check the wettest part of the floors and do testing that way. The other thing that people get wrong is I see them all the time with a surface meter test on top of a vinyl flooring, measure the concrete. The standard is very clear. It has to go on the bare concrete. So if someone's testing through the vinyl or the vinyl tile or floor covering, that's not meeting the standard requirement, and it could affect the results.
So when we go around and do mold testing, like moisture mapping in a house for mold, we put the surface meter directly on top of tiles or whatever flooring there is. So in that instance, that's different, right? Because all we're doing is seeing, is there moisture there? Is there not moisture there? Is that right?
Look, it depends on the meter, I suppose, but they do say that it does affect the results. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to give you some indication, but we tried it here. We had some of the vinyl tiles that you see in the Coles Woolworths supermarkets, and we tested it on top of the tile, and then we took the tile out, and there was like a 2% difference. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen with every meter, but it does rely on it conducts the way it conducts the waves through the concrete. So that's obviously affected and broken when there's a vinyl flooring down. So it's not I couldn't tell you for sure depending on the meter, but I know with our meter, it certainly affected the results with the flooring still on it.
Okay. And if it was tiles or floorboards, would that be different again?
We'll see floorboards. So you mean timber floorboards that are the subfloor?
Yeah.
Or timber sitting on top of a concrete floor?
Sorry, anything sitting on concrete. Does the type of flooring affect the reading?
Well, if you're trying to measure the concrete through a timber floor, I mean, a lot of those timber floors are, 10, 12, 14, 20 mil thick. So you're probably not even testing the concrete. You're more than likely testing the timber. In saying that, obviously moisture, if there's moisture there, it's going to come up the timber. So it may give you a higher result for that reason.
Which is interesting because you would have your moisture meter set on concrete, not timber. And the
that is
reading
right.
would be wrong anyway.
So, well, it will be wrong. And look, the meter we use, the Tramex meter, does have concrete and timber, but the timber requires us to put pins on it. So it's an attachment and a hammer attachment, and you put the pins into the timber. It doesn't give us a surface reading, so it wouldn't be an accurate test, but it would be interesting to try. I'm sure that it would probably pick up a wetter spot with timber or even sit on concrete, but I haven't tried it, to be honest.
Okay, so let's move on from the meters. How long does a residential concrete slab take to cure properly?
So there's many documents out there about an inch a month, and Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia did a document saying, it's an inch a month. I'm not saying that's not correct, but there's many things that affect it. Like, for instance, the water cement ratio of the concrete slab when it was first poured. Most are about 0.5%. However, been in the sun too long, or they put more water in it. And obviously, so there's a lot of excess water in a concrete mix that's used to make it more workable, but it's not actually required other than to make it more workable. So it can really vary. So the inch a month, Cement, Concrete and Aggregates also say that that's for a 100 mil slab. Once you go to a 150 mil slab, that's double or triple. Then you go to a 200 mil slab, it extends it again. As I say to everyone, that's from you start measuring it from the last time it got wet. So, you've got a slab sitting out there in the rain that's been there for 6 months with no rain, and then it pours with rain for a week. It's basically back to 100. So you start again. It's, is something that people don't understand. We go into commercial buildings that don't have the roof in, or don't have the walls in, don't have the windows in, and they ask us to test because they know it's going to be high, but they need a variation. And look, we've never found a slab under 12 months old that has 12 to 18 months old that meets the requirements of any of the standards. So the inch a month, maybe concrete when they brought the document out was different, or maybe it's just, everything's built a lot quicker nowadays as well, as you know. So it's, but people come to us constantly and say, inch a month. And we go, well, our experience is that it's not going to be an inch a month. And
nowhere near that.
And nowadays you've got waffle pads as well domestically now. So they might be, I think they're about 80, 85 mil thick on the thin part, but at the deep part, they're 300, 380 mil thick. So they're going to obviously hold more moisture. But again, they sit out in the rain for a while before they start building on it as well.
Didn't actually occur to me that slabs would be that affected by rain once they are what I would deem as cured. I know it affects timber, and timber goes moldy. I hadn't transferred that to concrete.
Well, concrete's like timber, it's hygroscopic. So it absorbs moisture and it releases moisture. So, and it's like a sponge. When I was doing the moisture testing course, they brought a sponge along and they used that as an example, how it absorbs and releases moisture. So it's very much like timber in that regard.
So we're, leaving slabs out to cure for, I don't know, a couple of weeks, and then we're putting frames on them. So by what you're saying is we are trapping a heck of a lot of moisture inside our construction as a standard in Australia.
Look, we are. And the other thing, the one thing I did forget to mention is the surface finish. Now, when you go to a commercial installation especially, they like to power trowel the surface of the concrete to get it rock hard to get the MPA they require. That burnished surface is basically nearly impervious. So it's not releasing moisture from the slab. And that's one of the biggest things we found. We did some testing on a slab over near the airport, and we tested it for 3 years, and it was highly burnished, and it dropped 3% in 3 years. And it was just a test done for someone. It was only drying from one side, but it just proved that the moisture just couldn't get out. And so that also has to be taken into account as well. Plus, you can't glue over. There's very few products that you can glue to a burnished slab. It's like trying to stick to glass. So if a builder comes to me and says, how can I get the slab to dry quicker? The first thing we say is we'll grind the slab to get the burnish off. The trouble is obviously grinding's not cheap. And then the other tradesmen come in, they spill paint and plaster all over it. You've got to grind it again. The builder doesn't want to grind it again, but a moisture barrier is not cheap. Sometimes grinding it twice would be cheaper than the moisture barrier.
So if you have a burnished slab and there's moisture trapped inside that slab, do mold spores grow inside the slab?
Not a mold expert, but not.
If the moisture is trapped, is that a problem?
Yeah. Well, it's very high alkalinity within the concrete. I'm not an expert on mold. You would have to ask someone. I don't think so. I've never seen mold just grow on a concrete slab. It's normally where, the timber butts up to the concrete and it's wet and it's been sitting there for a long time. I've never personally seen in all my time a concrete slab that's got mold on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought so, but...
Yeah, but obviously with timber and the furniture and that sort of stuff on it, yes, mold does grow in it. And we've got a couple of jobs going at the moment with mold growth where it's really got into the timber from there.
It's time for a quick sponsor shout out. Today's episode of the Building Sciology Potty is proudly brought to you by our amazing sponsors, Enduro Builders and Climasure. A huge thank you to these incredible businesses for supporting the podcast and helping us spread the word about better buildings to live and breathe in. Your support makes this podcast possible. Please head over to their websites and follow their social pages. So just to go back to my question, if there's a burnished slab and the moisture is trapped, is that a problem? Because if it can't get out and it's not going to create a humidity issue inside a conditioned space or a home, does that matter?
Well, it does. It does matter because obviously it's not releasing the moisture straight away. I suppose it depends on what flooring you're putting over the top, but if you're gluing anything to it, it's got to come off anyway to make the floor porous because adhesives and leveling compounds need a porous slab. There are some products out there that can go over a non-porous slab, but the majority of products require it to be able to key to the slab. So it is a problem. And as I said, we always recommend removing that to get the slab to dry quicker. But the builders like to get that heavily troweled finish to get the MPA up to because they've got certain requirements as well. And look, we've spoken to many builders over the years. The concreter doesn't care about the floor covering going over the top. They've got a spec to meet, and that's all they care about. When we've sat down and spoken to some of them and why we need the slab to be maybe not as burnished, they understand, but they say, well, look, we understand that, but we've got our own specification to meet and we need to burnish it. And look, in America, I know at one stage they were looking at wood trowel finish on concrete slabs to make them dry quicker. I'm not sure if that's still happening, but they did try it for a while. They've tried quicker drying concrete as well, but that I haven't seen any of that in Australia.
Okay. So cracks in concrete worry a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
What causes cracks in concrete, and when are they actually a problem versus just being cosmetic?
Look, most ones you see are surface cracks, and they could be from curing, they could be just from movement. I mean, some of the buildings in the city, some of the big buildings in the city have got scary cracks in them, but, they get engineers in to check those out to make sure they're okay. If you've got a slab on, a new slab with a house, you'll generally always find cracks in them. Especially when you pour them in summer and they're in 30, 40 degree heat, there's a heavy chance of them cracking. Surface cracks aren't that big a problem, but obviously if they're deeper than that, which, might need to do a core hole to test that. But in general, most of the cracks that we deal with are, they can be treated. There are treatments, there are epoxies you can put in for moisture. There are other treatments you can do. Some of the manufacturers have carbon fibre tie systems that you can use for cracks and trenches and things like that. Look, I would, again, that's something for a structural engineer, and we do get them in quite often if they just did one recently where there were cracks everywhere and they came in and they took measurements and did whatever testing they did to make sure the slab was okay. There was also a lot of deflection in this particular slab. So there's a lot of movement, which had caused the issue. So they put some carbon fibre ribbons down, which I hadn't seen before, to be honest, but they helped to strengthen the slab so it could take increased weights.
Carbon fibre ribbons, what's that? Look,
it's again, it's the first time I've seen it, but it's I don't know, about probably 3 inches wide, and you stick it to the floor, and it helps with the deflection of the slab.
So it's basically like a patch, like when you cut your head.
It's quite long though. Some of these were 10 meters long, and they crisscross across the floor, and they're obviously bracing. And they put it above and below the slab too. So it is a bracing system, yeah.
Okay.
But it's the very first time I've ever seen it used. Yeah. I can get you some more information on that. I don't know anything about it myself. I was just, as I said, first time I saw it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to learn more about. If there's like sort of new things being learnt about how to stop cracking in concrete slabs, we want to know about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Don, what are the most common errors you see builders or trades making with concrete? And how do you think that we can avoid that?
Look, the most common is two things. One, they don't moisture test. I mean, that's really the biggest. They run the gauntlet, or they don't know, or they don't think it's required. And some builders sign contracts where they're responsible for the moisture, if there's a moisture issue in the slab, because they don't know enough about it. So, of course, then there's there's high moisture in the slab, which we could have told them, and they could be up for $10, $20, $50, $100,000. So they'll do whatever it takes to try and not have to pay that money. Whereas those that include it, don't include it in there, and so there could be a variation. They don't seem to mind as much. It's moisture test. Well, understanding moisture and floor coverings, for instance, that adhesives are getting better moisture tolerant, but they're still, with enough moisture and alkalinity, they can break down. So if they understand that, the other thing they get the floor layers in too quick, in commercially anyway. The last thing that should go into a commercial building is the floor coverings. And yet it goes in while they're still plastering, while they're still painting. So it goes down probably a couple of months earlier than it could have. So there's slabs still wet. You've got painters and stuff working all over it. So they put plastic protection down. That plastic protection gets damaged by the trades. It gets plaster dust in it. And I don't care what anyone says, you cannot get all of the plaster dust out of carpet when it's embedded in the pile. And if you try to with a steam cleaning, it actually sets the plaster. It can set it rock hard. So it's not putting the floor coverings in last. Now, I understand with their schedule they can't do it, but they need to, look at ways, because they end up spending to have the carpet cleaned. If it's carpet, professionally cleaned, because it's so soiled, it gets, plaster in it. So it's not going to wear as well as it is. It doesn't look aesthetically as good as it should. So planning better for it if they can, understanding, moisture, maybe looking at products that are more moisture tolerant, but that's normally not up to them. That's normally up to the architect. So it's also up to the architects to understand a bit more about moisture with these products. And I know this will never happen, but not taking the cheapest price from a flooring contractor. There are flooring contractors out there that include everything in their price. And, of course, it comes time to award the job, or you're too dear. And the guy that's, 10 grand below them, he didn't include the moisture barrier. He didn't include moisture testing. He didn't include this. The end of the day, they could get a variation for $20,000. It could be more expensive. The good commercial contractors and retailers out there, normally, if they don't include it, they'll at least tell you that they haven't. Like, I haven't included moisture testing. So, if I'm a builder, I'm asking them to include everything that they've included in the job, or give them a scope and say, this is what you have to include, so that they're pricing apples for apples as well, because sometimes they're not. They're pricing a guy who's included everything versus a guy that's included the minimum. And at the end of the day, everyone loses, because, if the guy who's got the cheapest price gets screwed, he's just going to put cheaper labor on there.
Yeah.
That's understanding that sort of thing, understanding the products you're putting down. Some are highly moisture tolerant and others aren't. So it's, and look, builders are getting better because they're getting bitten. I work for one of the biggest builders in the country, and they engage me now for pretty much everything from start to finish, because it saves them money at the end of the day.
And that's residential or commercial? Yep.
Look, residential's a bit hard, to be honest, because, trying to engage me for a residential job, it's expensive, especially for the cost of the laying. Whereas, when you're talking at a multi-million-dollar fit out, costs are negligible, and they'll do it whatever it takes to get it finished. I do residential work, but obviously commercial work's probably 95% of my business, because when I get called in, normally it's to fix a big problem, or it's just, look, fix it. It's not the money's not an issue. It's just that we need to get it fixed. And sometimes, like if it's a hospital or an aged care facility or something like that, downtime is costing them huge amounts of money per day. So they need to get it rectified quickly.
You've mentioned this moisture barrier many times during our conversation, and I know waterproofing in wet areas causes massive moisture and mold issues in residential and in commercial buildings. So could you explain a little bit about what is good and bad practice, or best practice around that?
Okay, so a waterproof membrane is not a moisture barrier, and this is where a lot of problems do occur in it. So Ardex, for instance, make a product called WPM 002, which is a waterproof membrane, which is a tanking product, so it goes in under, in wet areas, but it is not a moisture barrier. And other manufacturers make similar products. It's just a product that popped into my head. So if you're using that and the slab has a high moisture content, you still need a moisture barrier as well as a waterproof membrane. Now, the amount of jobs I've been out to where they went, no, we used a moisture barrier. And I went, no, you used a waterproof membrane. And they went, same thing. A waterproof membrane is there to stop moisture going through it, down, but it still does allow moisture vapor up through it, whereas a moisture barrier reduces substantially moisture going both ways. So pardon me. They are two completely different things. They do similar jobs, but the moisture barrier is the belts and braces, but also for NCC regulations in wet areas, you do need a waterproof membrane. So it's understanding that there is a Australian standard for waterproofing, which is 3740, AS 3740. It is a residential waterproofing standard. There is no commercial waterproofing standard. Not sure why, but there isn't. They use the residential one for commercial because there is no commercial one. And it was only just finished, I think, in 2022, But for some reason, it wasn't allowed to cover commercial. So there are things commercially that aren't covered under any standard, but they still use that. So waterproofing is there's some grey areas on where waterproofing should be. For instance, a commercial kitchen doesn't need a waterproofing membrane. Now, I can't think outside of a shower or bathroom what gets wetter than a commercial kitchen. But so in theory, you don't need a waterproof membrane in a commercial kitchen. Now, the NCC is always changing. We have spoken and tried to get them to include it, but for some reason, it's the moment a commercial kitchen's not a wet area. It's they all.
But a residential kitchen is.
It's not. Residential kitchen, no. There's a laundry. It's basically the shower. Yeah, so there is a lot of grey areas with this as well. There's a table they've taken it out, but they still reference it in the latest NCC documents, which used to tell you where you needed waterproof. Then there's some places where you need water resistant so you get waterproof, water resistant. So there's a variation there, and it's
and then
even
you get a moisture barrier. So there's waterproofing,
that's right.
resisting, and moisture barriers, and they all do different things.
They're all different things. And then you've got the moisture suppressant, which I mentioned previously, which is none of those. But it is very cheap, and a lot of people use it because it is very, very cheap and easy to apply. A moisture suppressant. That's the one that you spray on.
Okay. So is there a best practice here?
Look, as long as you follow the NCC, best practice, if I'm a builder, I'm putting a waterproofing membrane in a commercial kitchen. However, you price that and you're pricing against builders that aren't because they don't need to, you may not get the job. So best practice is, follow the standard, follow manufacturer's instructions, follow NCC. You can go over and above, but look, the industry as a whole, especially in Victoria at the moment, is, it's not going well. So it's because everything that's happened here, we're in a lot of debt. So builders are, more and more wanting the cheapest price because they're wanting to win. They've got to win a job at very low margins. It was getting a lot better, but, COVID and everything like that and the market diving. Through COVID, residential went through the roof because people were doing do-it-yourself and things for their house, and then they were getting the floor coverings done. Coming through that now, it's very, very quiet. At least in Victoria, I know other states aren't as bad. But, builders have just predominantly generally taken the cheapest price, obviously because they've got to make margins. And sometimes it's fine, but other times it backfires on them.
And what you say about pricing, things in the building industry cost the same, for the most part, whether you're Joe or John, know. So when you are getting a price, it really is about what is included and what is not included, other than
Definitely.
rather than any other metric.
And look, that goes for all trades as well. It's not just flooring. Obviously, it's painting, it's plumbing, it's electrical, it's everything. They're all getting screwed down on pricing.
100%. So I heard someone mention this week, I think, on Instagram somewhere, something about an epoxy waterproofing membrane, and they were saying it's the duck's guts. Do you have any comment on that type of product?
Epoxy moisture barrier are you talking about a moisture barrier?
You know what? I'm not a waterproofing expert. Yeah, I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. But I know that this person was saying, we've got this amazing thing and blah, blah, blah. And I was just wondering what your comment was on that sort of product.
So being independent, I try and stay away from brands, but there are, Ardex make a product called WPM 300, which is it's a two-part epoxy moisture barrier. Mapai make a similar product. Sika do as well. And Uzan, a lot of these manufacturers make similar products. They're two-part epoxy moisture barriers, which are considered the premium. They can go up to 100%, which is the maximum RH of a subfloor. So they are thought to be the belts and braces. Obviously, you're paying for that. And if you've got a slab that you think is going to be 100 or it's going to be close to 100, they're the products you use. But sometimes you might have a slab that's at 90%. So you don't need to spend that amount of money. They are expensive, but they do a good job. They stop hydrostatic pressure. They can stop rising damp, some of the products and things like that. So they are very, very good products. And look, those sorts of products would be the ones that I would recommend first. But, if you don't need to go to that cost, if you can get away with there's polyurethane moisture barriers and things like that can go up to 90, 93%. So it's kind of horses for courses. So we'll say you moisture test the floor, understand where the moisture is, and then you can select a product from that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that.
That's right.
The homeowners. So I'm a DIYer and I want to redo my floors. Do you find that this creates, are you called to investigate these sorts of things?
Look, I am, but, it is generally by insurance companies. We do a lot of work for insurance companies because the insurance companies are always trying to save money. So they'll engage us to find who's at fault so they can get the money back off them. For Mr. and Mrs. Smith, it can be too expensive, to be honest. But you've got background in building or anything like that, you can drill a hole in the floor. You could do the test yourself. When we came out with the last resilience standard, a lot of people wanted us to put the surface meter in there for residential because everyone could do a surface meter test. But, we spoke about it at length. And as we agreed that, if you're a manufacturer of a product, vinyl flooring, are you going to allow someone to do a test method that you know or don't think is as good, and then they put it down and it fails? So if they allow that, they could get 1,000 failures across Australia because the right test method wasn't used. So that's going to cost them a lot of money. When it comes time to a flooring failure, the first thing the manufacturer will ask is, did you moisture test? And if they say surface meter, they'll go, oh, well, you haven't used the right meter. I understand why they wanted to bring it in residentially, and it's better than nothing, but it's still not, it's only an indicative test method. It can be affected by many different things. So there was a high push to have that surface meter in there, but, you could buy equipment to do an in-situ probe test. Or, to be honest, if you're built a new house, as you know from what we've discussed, the slab's going to have a high moisture content. It's going to need a moisture barrier. For most products, some products can go up to 100%, but not at the moment, not many resilient floors, not any that I know of can. So vinyl flooring would need a moisture barrier. There are carpet tiles. If you're putting broadloom carpet down on a slab, the standard actually says you don't necessarily have to moisture test at all because a carpet conventionally installed breathes. You've got an underlay that breathes, you've got a carpet that breathes. So it's allowing the moisture out, whereas with vinyl, it's getting trapped underneath, which is why you can get breakdown of the adhesive, mold growth, and that sort of thing. You can still get it with carpet conventionally installed around the wooden spikes.
Yeah, I've seen that. And I've also, a carpet's porous, right? So if it gets wet and stays wet, it's going to go icky, moldy. Anyway. Yeah.
One of the things that I did have an issue with the mold and restoration standard was that it actually said that in some cases you can dry the floor with the carpet and underlay still down. I've been in the industry a long time and I've yet to see that that's possible. It really needs to be taken up and cleaned. And as you know, you'll get mold growth and all those sorts of things. It should be taken up even for that reason.
Yeah, that doesn't sound sensible.
No.
So would you recommend that every slab is just a moisture barrier is put on every slab just to be safe?
If it's new, yes, depending on the flooring. If the flooring can't go up to 100%, yes. I mean, some people have a lot of people are now going polished concrete. Some of that isn't affected by moisture, some is, and some goes cloudy and milky because it is affected by moisture. But I wouldn't say everything because there are some, coatings and things that can go up to 100%. But if you're putting vinyl or vinyl planks down, yes, if it's a new slab, even if it's, I've got a 1970s house. Now, it's timber floor, but if it was concrete, it would have no plastic sheeting underneath because that wasn't required in the early 70s. So if you've got no plastic sheet under the slab, moisture's just getting into the slab from the sides, from underneath. So even we're finding a lot of older slabs, especially with the supermarkets now that have got really old buildings that have no vapor retarder, we're finding readings of up to 100% because there's nothing stopping the moisture getting in. So it's with a new slab, yes, I would say if it's a flooring that's not moisture tolerant, yes, you would need to. And the flooring contractor should be recommending that. There also, you can get hybrid planks, which are those loose lay planks, which are floating floor or engineered timber. In that case, you can use black plastic sheeting as a moisture barrier, which is obviously a lot cheaper because it slides on top. It's not glued to the floor. But if glue's used, then, yeah, you would need a moisture barrier.
And as a polished slab, is that considered sealed? That's
Yes.
sealed, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it still does breathe.
So it still will
sealed slab still does allow moisture vapor out, yeah.
Continue to cure, yeah. Are there any new technologies or approaches to concrete that you are excited about?
Look, I'm not a concreter, so the things I am excited about is the equipment I use. Like, for instance, the Wagner equipment, as I said, I've been using it for 15 years. Like, when I first started using it, you had to write the serial number down of the sensor on a piece of paper. Everything was handwritten down, put it in the equipment we used, we drill into the slab. We had to hold out with our hand the vacuum or come up with some way of doing it. It was really quite finicky, and a hole might take me half an hour to do and document. The equipment we use now, we've got a hollow core drill bit which attaches to the vacuum so there is no dust. We've got a DeWalt kit that's it's amazing. It's battery powered, but the batteries last for a long time. So It takes the dust out. When we put the sensor in, it Bluetooths to your phone, which then, when you're finished with that, it goes to a website and the report's there. And we've used that report, goes into our report. So we can do 24, 25 holes in a supermarket in 2 and a bit hours. Whereas, 10, 15 years ago, they might take me 5 or 6 hours. So the equipment's getting a lot better. The standards are always changing and updating. I know in America, they've been trying for fast drying concrete and more environmentally friendly concrete. And although I sit on a couple of the ASTM standards, I haven't had any feedback on those. So I don't know how they're going. Adding more fly ash to the mix to make it more environmentally friendly, but that can affect some glues. The equipment's always, the way they bring it out and they update things. With the Wagner equipment we use now, there's actually a data logger, which would be good for some restorers. So it goes into our sensor, it stays in the slab, and it can stay there. I'm doing a house in Brisbane, which I've been doing for 2 years now. So these data grabbers are put in so that the homeowner can go past with their phone and it gives them a read to their phone. So they can then monitor without me there, they can monitor these readings over as long as they want. We have had a battery went flat after a year and a half, so we had to just take it out and replace the battery. But things like that, if you're doing restoration, you can put them in the slab from when you take the floor coverings down, and you can monitor how quickly it's drying or if it's drying at all, because it may not be drying in a section. So there may be a moisture ingress problem there. But, that sort of equipment is just like, to me, I just think it's just amazing how they came up with this stuff. It's called a data grabber.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Awesome. That sounds very exciting. Do you have any resources? Do you have like a YouTube channel, website, documents, training, anything that the listener can access to learn more about flooring failures, concrete testing, etc.?
Look, I've done a couple of things, some of which you've seen. I've also done a thing for ABEC, which is a video for ABEC members, which is to do with insurance. I hate doing this stuff. I have to be honest. Couldn't imagine doing a YouTube channel or a Twitter or something, like a TikTok or something like that. I'm sure there are people out there that love doing that stuff and could do it. Look, I've been in the industry a long time, and I'm happy to give back. If someone wants training in it, happy to do it. If someone wants to call me and go, I've got this problem, I'm happy to spend 5-10 minutes on the phone. It's different if it's going to be an hour or something like that, but happy to help. There are a lot of videos online, like if the moisture testing, there's a lot of videos on how to do. Wagner and Tramex have very good videos on how to use their equipment, so that you could watch them and you could do as long as you had a basic idea on using a hammer drill and concrete and stuff, you would be able to do it. But yeah, me personally, and to be honest, my job takes up so much of my time, I don't have time. We do have a marketing lady at Atar, and she is trying to get me to do more stuff. And when
There's so much knowledge in there. We need to get it out.
There is. And look, I'm happy to get it, happy to pass it on to people. And I do presentations for builders a lot. So I'll go to their office and there might be 20 or 30 of them there. I'll do a PowerPoint presentation on just everything from moisture to common failures of flooring, what's the most common things, how to fix it, what to watch out when you go for on site. And look, for the builders, I don't charge them for that, because they then come to me if there's a problem. And, gets it out there. So there is that sort of stuff. And we've got a couple of things on our Atar. We've got a couple of things on LinkedIn. But look, I just don't have the time, to be honest. But there are a lot of stuff overseas. A lot of those guys do things like that overseas, but not so much here.
All right. Well, between you and I, we'll try and put together a bit of a list of resources and things that the listener can go and check out if they want to know more about this.
Sure.
And I'll put it in the show notes.
Yep.
All right, now we're actually up to the last question. And the last question I ask all of my guests is, out of everything that you've learned in your career, all the flooring failures, all the court cases, all of the job sites, everything that you've seen, what is the one thing that you would like the listener to know?
Look, if you do it right, it may cost more, but if you do it right, the job is, as I said, it's 3 times the cost to replace generally a job. If you do it right, if everyone quoted equally, I do tenders on large projects, and you get, this guy will be 100,000, this one will be 150, this one will be 200, and the end client will go, take the 100,000. I'm going, no. There's a reason he's 100,000. He's missed something out. Look at the quotes, understand why, ask questions on why it's so cheap. And with moisture testing, I look at it, it's a risk assessment for the contractor. I did a presentation for a group, for one of the large flooring groups, and they ask, well, why do we need to moisture test? And the reason is it's a risk assessment and it's an insurance policy for yourself. If I go and test today and it's 75% and it meets the standard, and gets laid 6 months' time, there's a moisture event, something happens, the floor blows off the floor and it's wet, and I come in and test and go, it's 90. The guy goes, well, here, the test result's 75. He's protected. If he hasn't done those tests, they're going to assume, the insurance company's going to assume that it was wet at the time and it's his fault. Now, even if the slab's wet today, so if it's 90% today and you test it and you put a moisture barrier down, 6 months' time it fails, but I go in and test and it's 95, well, it's like, well, okay, things have changed. So something's happened or there's an ingress. So it is, spending that money at the start, which isn't a huge expense. I understand it is cutting into your profit, but it protects. I grew up in my parents' business, which was a little retail store in Katoomba. And there wasn't people around there to teach you these sorts of things. And back then everything was solvent based, so it wasn't affected by moisture. But today, low VRCs, everything's affected by moisture. There's a reason to do everything right, and there's, reason to moisture test. Just undertake moisture testing. If you do it correctly, it will save you money long term. You may not think so to start with, but and it's protecting you and protecting your businesses. And, we see daily businesses going out of business, not just in flooring, everywhere. And it's just, try and do the thing. If you do everything right, hopefully it protects you.
Mm-hmm. The voice of experience right there.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much,
okay.
Don, for your time tonight. It's been a fantastic conversation, and I hope the listener takes away a lot of really good information from that. So appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jess.
No problem at all.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.